One freezing night, a kind man saved a stranger and gave her shelter. He had no idea that saving her would change his life forever. "Please, I can't feel my hands." The voice was barely audible over the howling wind, but David Hunter heard it. Through the frosted window of his roadside diner, he saw the silhouette. A car stalled in the middle of the road, headlights flickering weakly against the wall of white snow. It was past 9. The storm had been raging for 3 hours. He'd already flipped the sign to closed and was reaching for his coat when those headlights appeared. David pushed open the door, and the cold hit him like a physical blow. Snow whipped across his face as he trudged toward the car. Inside, hunched over the steering wheel, was an elderly woman. Her lips were blue, her whole body trembled. "Ma'am?" David knocked on the window. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were glassy with fear and exhaustion.
He tried the door, locked from the inside. "You need to open the door. Your engine's dead." It took her 3 tries, her fingers fumbling, before the lock finally clicked. David pulled the door open, and cold air rushed out. She nearly collapsed into his arms. "I've got you," he said, steadying her. "Come on, let's get you inside." She could barely walk. He half carried her through the snow, her weight slight, but her body shaking violently. The diner was warm, thank God. He guided her to the booth nearest the heater and wrapped his own coat around her shoulders. "Stay right here. I'm getting you something hot." Her teeth chattered so hard she couldn't respond. David moved quickly, poured coffee, heated up soup, grabbed the spare blanket he kept in the back. When he returned, she was staring at her hands like she didn't recognize them. "Here." He set the mug in front of her, wrapping her fingers around it. "Drink, slowly." She took a sip, then another. Color began creeping back into her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, broken. I thought I was going to die out there." "You're safe now." David sat across from her, watching her carefully. "What were you doing driving in this storm?" "I was trying to reach someone." Her hands shook as she lifted the mug again. "The heater died first, then the engine. I didn't expect it to get this bad." David glanced outside. The snow was coming down even harder now, the roads completely invisible. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Ruth," she said, her voice still trembling. "Ruth Miller." "I'm David. And Ruth, I'm sorry, but you're not driving anywhere tonight. Roads are completely gone." She looked up at him, fear flickering in her tired eyes. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." His voice was firm but kind. "I've got a place just behind the diner. It's not much, but it's warm and you'll be safe. Roads should clear by morning." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, yes, but also something heavier, something like sorrow. "You don't even know me," she said softly. David shrugged. "Doesn't matter. You need help. That's enough." Ruth stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable crossing her face. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." David just smiled, that same tired but genuine smile he'd worn for years. It's what anyone would do. But Ruth knew better. Not everyone would do this. In fact, most people wouldn't. And as she sat there, warming her frozen hands on the coffee mug, she realized with a start that the man standing in front of her, the man who just saved her life without hesitation, might be the very person she'd been searching for. The man her late husband had destroyed. Before we dive deeper, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. An hour later, David led Ruth through the snow to the small house behind the diner. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, a living room with furniture that had seen better days, but it was warm, and it was home.
"Nathan," David called as he unlocked the door. "We've got a guest." A 10-year-old boy appeared in the hallway, brown hair sticking up in every direction, wearing pajamas covered in stars. His face was pale, thinner than it should have been for a boy his age, but his eyes lit up when he saw Ruth. "Hi," he said brightly. "Did you get stuck in the storm? Dad always helps people who get stuck." Ruth's heart clenched. He certainly does. David ruffled his son's hair. "Nathan, this is Miss Ruth. She's going to stay in your old room tonight, okay? Go grab the extra blankets from the closet for me." "Okay." Nathan darted off down the hall. David turned to Ruth, lowering his voice. "He's a good kid. Too good, sometimes. Always trying to help, when even—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening slightly. "Anyway, let me get you settled."
He led her to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. It was simple, a bed, a nightstand, a lamp, but the blankets looked warm and the space felt safe. "Bathrooms across the hall. If you need anything, I'm in the room next door." David hesitated at the doorway. "You sure you're okay? You still look pretty shaken up." Ruth managed to smile. "I'm better now, thanks to you." After he left, Ruth sat on the edge of the bed and pulled a small, worn, leathered journal from her purse. Her hands were steadier now, but her heart was racing. She opened the journal to a page she'd read 100 times. Her late husband's handwriting, shaky from illness, but still legible. David Hunter. Age, 25. Brilliant engineer. I stole his engine design and claimed it as my own. Sold it for $3 million. Built my entire company on his work. He lost everything. I destroyed his career, his reputation, his future. Ruth, if you're reading this, I'm already gone, but please, find him. Give him what's owed. I can't undo what I did, but maybe you can make it right."
Ruth closed the journal, tears blurring her vision. She'd hired a private investigator 6 months ago. It had taken that long just to track him down. And when she'd finally gotten the address, a small diner on the outskirts of town, she'd driven out immediately to face him, to tell him the truth, to give him the inheritance that should have been his all along. But then the storm hit, her car died, and David Hunter, the man her husband had betrayed, had saved her life without knowing who she was. Ruth looked around the modest room, the worn furniture, the cracks in the ceiling. This man had nothing, and yet he'd given her everything tonight. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. How was she supposed to tell him? David stood at the kitchen window, watching the snow fall. The storm was finally starting to ease, but the world outside was buried in white. He could barely make out the shape of Ruth's car in the parking lot. Behind him, Nathan padded into the kitchen in his socks. "Dad, is Miss Ruth going to be okay?" David turned, his expression softening. "Yeah, buddy. She's safe now." Nathan climbed onto a stool at the counter. "You always do that, help people. I mean, even when we don't have a lot." David's throat tightened. Nathan was too perceptive for his own good. The kid knew their situation, knew the diner was struggling, knew the medical bills were piling up, knew his surgery kept getting pushed back because they couldn't afford it yet. But Nathan never complained, never asked why other kids had more. He just loved people, the way his mother never had. We help because it's the right thing to do, not because it's easy. Nathan nodded seriously. Then after a moment, "Do you think Mom would have helped Miss Ruth?" The question hit David like a punch. He took a slow breath. "I don't know, Nathan." That was the truth. Catherine, his ex-wife, had been charming once, beautiful, witty, full of life. But somewhere along the way, David had realized her love was conditional. It depended on what he could provide, what status he could give her, how much money was in the bank. When the diner started failing, when the bills started piling up, when David's dreams of returning to engineering crumbled under the weight of debt and exhaustion, Catherine had left, took the last of their savings and walked out the door without looking back. That was 2 years ago. "I think," Nathan said thoughtfully, "Miss Maria would have helped." David's chest warmed at the mention of their neighbor. Maria Sandlock, kind, steady,
always showing up with groceries or offers to watch Nathan when David had to work late. She'd been there through everything, never asking for anything in return. "Yeah," David said softly. "Maria would have helped." Nathan grinned. "You like her." "Nathan, you do. You smile differently when she's around." David shook his head, but he couldn't help smiling. "Get to bed, kiddo. School tomorrow if the road's clear." Nathan hopped off the stool, but paused at the doorway. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you helped Miss Ruth. I think she needed it." David watched his son disappear down the hall, and something settled in his chest. A reminder of why he did this. Why he kept the diner open even when it barely broke even. Why he helped strangers in snowstorms. Because Nathan was watching, learning, becoming the kind of man David hoped he'd be. And that mattered more than anything. If you've ever helped someone without expecting anything in return, you already know what David's about to discover. That kindness has a way of coming back, even when you least expect it. Stick with me. This story's just getting started. Ruth didn't sleep much that night. She lay in the small bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak and settle around her. Through the thin walls, she could hear David moving around, checking the locks, turning off lights, whispering goodnight to his son. A good father. A good man. And her husband had destroyed him. Charles's confession came only weeks before he died. At first, Ruth didn't want to believe it. The morphine, the guilt, it all sounded like the ramblings of a dying man. But afterward, she hired a private investigator, and everything he said was true. 20 years ago, David Hunter had been a rising star at Miller Engineering, her husband Charles's company. Brilliant, passionate, full of ideas that could have changed the industry. He'd spent years developing a revolutionary engine, more efficient, more sustainable, and producing half the emissions of anything on the market. He trusted Charles, looked up to him, called him a mentor, even a father figure. And Charles? He stole it, filed the patent under his own name, sold the design for millions, and when David confronted him, Charles made sure he'd never work again, blacklisted, ruined. David had been 25 years old, his whole future ahead of him. Charles Miller, her husband, had taken it all. Ruth closed her eyes, shame burning through her chest. She'd lived off that money, the mansion, the trips, the quiet comfort of a life she hadn't earned. Charles had always been secretive about business, and she'd never pushed. Maybe she just hadn't wanted to know. Then came the cancer. Fast, cruel, stripping him down piece by piece until there was nothing left but pain and truth. One night, between shallow breaths, he took her hand and placed the journal in it. The morphine loosened his grip, and guilt did the rest. She read about David, about the theft, about the deal that destroyed a man's life and haunted her husband for 20 years. And before the end came, he made her promise. Find him. Make it right. Now here she was, sitting in David Hunter's kitchen, drinking his coffee, sleeping in his son's old room, carrying the weight of her husband's sin like a shadow that refused to fade. The man she'd come to find had saved her life, and tomorrow she'd have to tell him the truth. She wasn't sure which one of them would survive it. Morning came cold and bright. Ruth woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices in the kitchen. She dressed slowly, her hands trembling as she tucked the leather journal back into her purse. Then she drew a breath and walked down the hall. Nathan was sitting at the table, eating cereal and swinging his legs. David was at the stove, flipping pancakes, looking more rested than he probably was. "Good morning," David said warmly. "Hope you like pancakes. It's basically the only breakfast I know how to make." Ruth managed to smile. "Pancakes are perfect." Nathan looked up, milk on his upper lip. "Dad makes the best pancakes, even better than Miss Maria's, but don't tell her that." David laughed. Nathan, you're going to get me in trouble.
There was a knock at the door. "Speaking of," David said, wiping his hands on a towel. He opened the door to reveal a woman in her early 30s, blonde hair pulled back, warm brown eyes, a casserole dish in her hands. "Morning," Maria said, stepping inside with easy familiarity. "Roads are still a mess, so I figured you two might need—" "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Maria, this is Ruth. She got stranded in the storm last night. Ruth, this is Maria, our neighbor, and the reason Nathan eats vegetables." Maria laughed, setting the casserole on the counter. "Nice to meet you, Ruth. I'm glad David found you before you froze out there." "He saved my life," Ruth said quietly. Maria glanced at David, something soft and knowing in her expression. "Yeah, he does that." There was a pause, comfortable, warm, and Ruth felt like she was intruding on something sacred. The way David and Maria moved around each other in the small kitchen, passing plates and pouring coffee without speaking. The way Nathan lit up when Maria sat down next to him. This wasn't just a neighbor. This was family. And Ruth was about to blow it all apart. After breakfast, Maria left for work, promising to check on them later. Nathan went to play in his room, leaving David and Ruth alone at the table.
Ruth's hands trembled around her coffee mug. "David," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He looked up, concern crossing his face. "Everything okay?" "No, not really." She took a breath. Can we talk at the diner? There's something I need to show you." 20 minutes later, they stood in the empty diner. Ruth's car was still buried in snow outside, but the roads were slowly being cleared. Soon, she'd be able to leave. But not before she did this. Ruth reached into her purse and pulled out the leather journal. Then, a folder of documents. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped them. "David," she said, her voice cracking, "before I tell you this, I need you to know I didn't come here by accident. I've been looking for you for 6 months." David's expression shifted, confusion replacing concern. "Looking for me? Why?" Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Because my late husband was Charles Miller." The name hit David like a physical blow. He stepped back, his face going pale. "What?" "Charles Miller," Ruth repeated, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "Your mentor, the man who—" She couldn't finish. David's jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists. "Get out." "David, please." "Get out of my diner." His voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. "You come into my home, meet my son, let me help you, and you're his widow? I know how this looks, but please, just listen." "Why should I?" David's voice cracked. "Your husband destroyed my life, stole 2 years of my work and sold it like it was his. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I lost my career, my reputation, my future. I was 25 years old and he made sure I'd never work in engineering again."
He was breathing hard now, 20 years of pain pouring out. "I had to open this diner just to survive. I watch my son suffer because I can't afford his surgery. I serve coffee and burgers when I should be designing systems that could help people. And you want me to listen?" Ruth was crying openly now, but she didn't move. She just held out the journal. "He confessed," she whispered, "before he died. Cancer took him last year, and in his final weeks, he told me everything. He couldn't live with the guilt anymore. And he made me promise, made me swear that I'd find you and make it right." David stared at the journal like it might burn him. "He wrote it all down," Ruth continued, her voice breaking. "Every detail, the theft, the blacklisting, how he built his entire fortune on your work. And he changed his will, David. He left you a portion of the inheritance, the money that should have been yours all along."
She held out the folder. "It's all here. The confession, the amended will, legal documents. I've been searching for you for months, and last night, when that storm hit," she let out a shaky laugh, "I was on my way here, to find you, to give you this, and instead, you saved my life." David didn't take the folder. He just stood there, his whole body rigid, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. "I don't want his money," he said finally, his voice hollow. "I know," Ruth whispered. "But David, your son needs surgery. I saw the medical bills on your desk. I know you're struggling. And I can't undo what Charles did, but I can give you what you're owed." David's eyes snapped to hers. "You went through my desk?" No, they were just sitting there, and I—" Ruth shook her head. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have looked. But David, please, let me do this. Let me make it right." For a long moment, David didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned and walked toward the window. He stood there, staring out at the snow-covered highway, his shoulders shaking. Ruth waited, her heart breaking. Finally, David spoke. "I spent 20 years hating him, building a life from nothing because he took everything. And now you're telling me that he felt guilty? That he wanted to make amends?" "Yes." "It doesn't change anything." David's voice was thick. "It doesn't give me back those years. Doesn't erase what he did." "I know." David pressed his forehead against the cold glass. "But Nathan needs that surgery." He turned around and Ruth saw tears on his face. "I'll accept it," David said quietly. "Not for me. For my son. I won't let my pride be the reason my son doesn't get another chance." Ruth let out a shaky breath, fresh tears spilling over. "Thank you. But I need you to understand something." David's voice was steady now, calm. "Your husband took everything from me. My career, my future, 20 years of my life." He paused. "But you didn't do that. You're not responsible for his choices. You came here to make amends for him," David continued. "That took courage." Ruth covered her mouth, sobbing. David took the folders slowly, his hands still trembling. He stared at the papers inside, legal documents, confessions, numbers that would change everything. Then he looked up at Ruth, standing there with tears streaming down her face, and something in him softened. "Don't go," he said quietly. Ruth blinked. "What?" "Stay. At least until we sort this out. Nathan should meet you properly and know who you are, what you did for us." Ruth's face crumpled with relief. "Are you sure?" "No," David admitted, "but it's the right thing to do." That night, after Nathan had gone to bed, David found Ruth sitting on the porch of the small house, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. He stepped outside, 2 mugs of tea in his hands. "Thought you might be cold." "Thank you." Ruth accepted the mug gratefully. David sat beside her, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. The night was quiet, except for the distant sound of wind through the trees. Finally, Ruth broke the silence. "I never had children, you know." David looked at her. "Charles and I. We tried for years. It just never happened." Her voice was soft, distant. "And when I saw you with Nathan this morning, the way you look at him, the way he trusts you completely, I realized something." "What?" "You didn't lose." Ruth turned to face him, fresh tears in her eyes. "Charles took your career, your reputation, 20 years of your life, but you still have Nathan. You have Maria. You have people who love you. And Charles?" Her voice broke. "Charles died alone in a hospital bed, haunted by what he'd done. So tell me, David, who really lost?" David's throat tightened. He stared down at his tea, unable to speak. "I would give anything," Ruth whispered, "to have what you have. A child who looks at me the way Nathan looks at you. Someone who stayed, like Maria stayed. But I don't. All I have left is the chance to make one thing right before I'm gone." David finally looked at her. "You're not gone yet, Ruth.
She smiled sadly. I'm 70 years old and alone in the world. I'm closer to gone than you think. David was quiet. Then, you're not as alone as you think. Not anymore. Ruth's tears fell freely now. Thank you.
They sat together in the cold night air, two people bound by tragedy and an unexpected chance at redemption. In the weeks that followed, Ruth chose to stay while the money was being processed. She found quiet joy in helping at the diner and in being grandma to a little boy who quickly stole her heart. Nathan adored her immediately. "Miss Ruth, I got an A on my test. Miss Ruth, can you help with my homework? Miss Ruth, look what I drew." Ruth, who'd spent decades in an empty house, came alive under his attention. She helped with homework, listened to his stories, learned to make his favorite grilled cheese. Maria noticed the change in David, too. "She's good for you both." The money came through within a few weeks. Ruth had already prepared everything, worked with her lawyers, set up the transfer, made sure every detail was handled. When David saw the amount in his account, he sat down hard in his office chair. It was enough. Enough for Nathan's surgery. Enough to pay off the diner's debts. Enough to maybe, just maybe, start dreaming again. Nathan's surgery was scheduled for the following month. David held his son's hand in the hospital waiting room, watching the boy try to be brave. "Dad?" Nathan's voice was small. "Am I going to be okay?" "Yes." David squeezed his hand. "You're going to be just fine." Maria sat on Nathan's other side, her hand resting on the boy's shoulder. She'd been there every step of the way, through the consultation, through the preparation, through the fear. She hadn't left once. When the surgeon finally came out hours later and said the words "complete success," David felt something inside him break open. Relief, gratitude, hope. He pulled Nathan into his arms when the boy woke up, holding him like he'd never let go. "We did it, buddy. We did it." Nathan smiled weakly. "Is Grandma Ruth here?" David blinked, surprised. "Grandma Ruth? That's what I call her now. She said it was okay. Is she here?" David looked up and saw Ruth standing in the doorway, her hand pressed to her heart. He nodded. She came in slowly and took Nathan's hand. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Good," Nathan mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. "I wanted you here." Ruth looked at David, tears streaming down her face. He nodded again, and she bent to kiss Nathan's forehead. 6 months later, Hunter's Garage and Diner reopened its doors. The sign outside was new, professionally painted, bright and welcoming. But it was the smaller plaque beside the door that meant the most to David. Hunter and Miller Designs, built on redemption. Inside, the diner was bustling, tables full of customers, the smell of fresh coffee and homemade pie. And in the back, through the new doorway David had built, was the garage.
It wasn't just a repair shop. It was a workshop, a place where David had returned to the work he'd abandoned 20 years ago, designing affordable, energy-efficient vehicle systems, creating solutions for people who couldn't afford the expensive options. And he wasn't doing it alone. 3 young apprentices worked alongside him, local kids who couldn't afford college but had the hunger to learn. David taught them everything he knew, the same way Charles Miller had once taught him. Except this time, there was no betrayal, only opportunity. Maria stood behind the counter pouring coffee for a regular. She caught David's eye and smiled. That same steady, quiet smile that had been holding him together for years. She'd been there through everything. The surgery, the reopening, the late nights when David couldn't sleep because the memories were too loud. She never asked for recognition or reward. She just stayed. And somewhere along the way, David had realized he loved her. Not the desperate, needy love he'd felt for Catherine, but something deeper, something built on trust and time, and the kind of partnership that didn't need grand gestures to prove itself. "Hey, you got a minute?" Maria handed the coffee pot to one of the apprentices and followed David outside.
The afternoon sun was warm. Snow had long since melted, replaced by the first hints of spring. David leaned against the porch railing, suddenly nervous. "I've been thinking," he started. Maria raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous." He laughed despite himself. "Yeah, well, I wanted to say thank you. For everything. For being there when I had nothing to offer. For loving Nathan like he's your own. For..." He trailed off, searching for words. "For being you." Maria's expression softened. "David, I'm not good at this. I'm still figuring out how to let people in, but I know I don't want to do this alone anymore. Any of it." Maria stepped closer, taking his hand. "You're not alone. You never were. I know, but I want to make it official. Not just for me, for Nathan too. He needs you. We both do." "Are you asking me what I think you're asking?" David met her eyes. "Yeah, I am." Maria smiled, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Took you long enough." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. For the first time in 20 years, David felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. If you've ever felt like life took everything from you, if you've ever wondered whether kindness still matters in a world that feels cold, stay with me, because this story isn't over yet.
Ruth became a permanent fixture in their lives. She visited twice a week, always bringing something: fresh bread, books for Nathan, tools for the garage. She'd sit at the counter and chat with Maria. She'd watch David work with a mixture of pride and sadness. One evening, as they were closing up, Ruth approached David in the garage. He was elbow deep in an engine, grease smeared across his forearms. "David," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." He wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face her. "Do you ever regret it, accepting the money?" David considered the question. "No," he said finally. "It saved my son's life. It gave me a second chance. I can't regret that." "But you still carry it. The anger, the hurt." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I probably always will. Your husband took something from me that I can never get back." He paused. "But holding on to that anger forever, it would just keep taking from me. And I'm tired of losing things." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Charles was a complicated man, brilliant, but deeply flawed. I think he knew what he'd done to you, and it aided him for years. He just didn't have the courage to face it while he was alive. Then I'm glad he told you, so you could do what he couldn't." Ruth reached out and squeezed his hand. "You're a better man than he ever was." David didn't know what to say to that, so he just squeezed back. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Catherine, David's ex-wife, showed up. David was working on a carburetor when he heard the bell over the door chime. He looked up and froze. She looked different, older, thinner. Her hair was cut shorter, her clothes less flashy than he remembered. But it was definitely her. "Hello, David." His hand stilled on the wrench. "Catherine." She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the diner, the new equipment, the customers, the obvious signs of success. "I heard you reopened. I wanted to see it for myself." "Well, now you've seen it." David set down the wrench and stood. "What do you want?" "I wanted to talk." She twisted her hands together. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but I wanted to apologize." David said nothing.
I left when things got hard, Catherine continued, her voice shaking. I left you and Nathan when you needed me most, and I know I can't undo that. But I'm sorry. I really am. Okay, David crossed his arms. Apology noted. I also wanted to ask. She hesitated. I heard about Nathan's surgery, that he's doing better. I thought maybe.
No, Catherine blinked. David? No, he repeated, his voice firm but not cruel. You walked away, Catherine. You don't get to walk back in now that things are better. I'm his mother. You gave up that title when you left. Nathan's happy now. He's healthy. He's got people in his life who love him unconditionally. I'm not going to let you disrupt that because you're feeling guilty or lonely or whatever it is you're feeling. I've changed. Maybe you have, David shrugged, but that doesn't mean you get a place in our lives. Some bridges, once you burn them, you can't rebuild. Catherine's face crumpled. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're happy. I really am. Then she was gone. Maria appeared from the back room a moment later. She'd clearly been listening. She didn't say anything, just walked over and wrapped her arms around David. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I am.
That evening, David picked Nathan up from school. The boy climbed into the truck, his backpack thudding on the seat beside him. Hey, kiddo, how was your day? Good, Nathan grinned. We learned about engineers in science class. I told everyone my dad's an engineer. David smiled. Yeah. Mr. Peterson said engineers make the world better. Is that what you're doing, Dad? David glanced at his son, this brave, brilliant kid who'd been through so much and still smiled like the world was good. I'm trying, he said. That's all any of us can do. Nathan nodded seriously. Then, after a pause, Dad, is Maria going to be my mom now? David's breath caught. Would you want that? Yeah. Nathan's grin widened. She's already kind of like my mom anyway. She makes me lunch and helps with homework and tucks me in. But it'd be cool if it was official. David's throat tightened. I'll work on that, buddy. Cool. Nathan pulled out his homework. Oh, and Grandma Ruth said she's bringing cookies on Friday, the chocolate ones. David laughed. Of course she is. Winter came again. David stood outside the diner one evening, watching snow begin to fall. Soft, gentle flakes that caught the light from the windows. It had been a year since that night. A year since he'd pulled a stranger from a storm and unknowingly pulled his entire future back from the edge. The door opened behind him. Maria stepped out, wrapping a scarf around her neck. You coming in? It's freezing out here.
In a minute. David held out his hand. She took it, stepping close. They stood together in silence, watching the snow fall. Inside, through the window, David could see Nathan laughing at something Ruth had said, could see the apprentices cleaning up the workshop, could see the life he'd built from the ashes of the old one. You know what's funny? David said quietly. What? I spent 20 years angry about what Charles Miller took from me, but if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't have the diner, I wouldn't have met you, Nathan wouldn't have Ruth in his life. He shook his head. I'm not saying what he did was right. It wasn't. But maybe redemption doesn't always look the way we expect. Maria squeezed his hand. Maybe it's not about the person who caused the pain. Maybe it's about the people who choose to heal it. David looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who had stood beside him through everything, who had never asked for anything, but had given everything. Marry me, he said. Maria's eyes widened. What? Marry me, David repeated. Not because I think I owe you, not because I need you to stay, but because I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it.
Maria's eyes filled with tears. You're supposed to have a ring for this, you know. I'll get you 10 rings, David cupped his face in his hands. Just say yes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, David, of course yes." He kissed her there in the falling snow, and it felt like the beginning of something he'd thought he'd lost the right to have. Hope. The plaque above the door gleamed in the morning light. Hunter and Miller Designs, built on redemption. Inside, the diner hummed with life. Regulars at the counter, apprentices in the workshop, Nathan doing homework in a booth, Ruth helping him with math. Maria poured coffee, her engagement ring catching the light. David stood at the threshold between the diner and the garage, taking it all in. This life he'd built from scraps and second chances. This family he'd found in the most unlikely places. And for the first time in 20 years, David Hunter felt like he was exactly where he belonged. This is a reminder that sometimes storms don't come to destroy us. They come to bring us the people meant to heal us. Friends, if this story reminded you that kindness always finds its way back, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Because sometimes the people we help become the ones who save us in ways we never expected. Thank you for staying until the very end. If you believe in second chances, in the power of forgiveness, and in the beauty of found families, subscribe to Soul Lift Stories. We've got more journeys ahead, stories that prove hope is always worth holding on to. See you in the next one.